Welcome to another episode of the Embodiyou video cast. This is a series of videos designed to connect you with teachers and practices that are all about connecting with the authentic self. And the authentic self is just that most resourced, peaceful, happiest part within us that we all have at all times. And all of the practices that I'm bringing to you are about reminders, all the different ways we can remind ourselves of who we really are, which is what Embodiyou is all about. And today I'm really, really excited to be joined by Melissa Clark. She's a yoga teacher that I have known for a number of years. And when we sat down a few months ago, we realized that we were like these little twin brains with, geeking out on science and yoga, and had found these sort of parallel paths through to the same practices. I couldn't be happier to have her join me. She's going to be on Embodiyou's regular weekly schedule, teaching trauma-informed yoga. So Melissa, why don't you tell folks about you in terms of, your practice of yoga, kind of how you got there, and a little bit about your class.
Sure, thank you. I'm so happy to be with you today here on this recording and just part of the larger Embodiyou platform of resources. Really excited to be here. And I always share with my classes in person that yoga is something that's helped me directly, yoga and meditation and all these tools that we're bringing out to folks through this platform. And so that's why I feel so motivated to share it. And trauma-informed yoga to me, and it can mean different things to different people, but the way I've been kind of trained and practice it is really an idea of wanting to share a practice, invite you into a practice that feels safe for you to experience sensations in your body, to kind of melt away from mental clutter without judging and just get into some physical movement. That means I tend to practice alongside with my class. In certain traditions, that's not always the way it works. Certainly in an online platform, there's a demonstration, and I'm still obviously checking to see if people are doing things correctly, but that's kind of one of the biggest differences. And I often use language that's more inviting, lots of options, and just a reminder, right, of that the practice can be different from day to day, moment to moment, and body to body.
I love that. I think when I think about creating a space that's safe for anybody who has experienced trauma, for whom that still intrudes on the present moment, honoring those individual differences is probably more important in a trauma-informed yoga class than in a regular yoga class. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's interesting doing it in an online format, things like lighting, you don't have to be as worried about because someone's going to set that for themselves. But some of my training has been to specifically not dim lights, to not use music that has lyrics, for instance. I tend to not use very much Sanskrit in my teaching in this way, even though I love Sanskrit in terms of the yoga philosophy, but just the idea that there's not a hierarchy, that I'm really there with the participants in the class, not as some sort of teacher with higher than thou knowledge, but that I know from my experience moving through these shapes in this way, connecting with my breath and taking a pause makes me feel better. And then I also know now, because I'm such a brain geek with you, that it actually does do things that help us rewire our nervous system from past traumas. And so even if we don't identify as someone perhaps who's had like a big T trauma in our lives, we've all had, you can't get through, I think, the human experience, right, without having some sort of samskara, impression, wound or scar. So it's a beneficial practice, I think, for anyone, and particularly in these times, being able to have those interoceptive cues, right? Just the way you might be feeling back into the body. As many folks who have had trauma experiences numb out or dissociate. So just honoring that you do that, it's a coping mechanism. Can you come back in safely for a moment and feel and notice how something feels in the body?
Beautiful. There's so much in that I want to dive into. So let's work backwards. So you said interoception. So tell listeners who don't know what that word means, what that means and why it's important, if you've ever dealt with a trauma trigger.
Gosh, let's hope I can articulate
Yeah, do
it
your best.
well. Yeah,
We'll muddle through.
so my understanding is that it's kind of bringing noticing and observation to the way things are really feeling in the body, less about like a mental label. So just the weight of your hand against the floor,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Feeling, and let's say we're in Savasana at the end of class and just feeling the weight of the body against the floor, feeling the support there. Because it's such a hard truth. It's not something where we could maybe spin off right into a ruminative thought or on a trauma spiral, but it's there. The ground is there.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I think, and that's really what I wanted to say. It's like the body sensation. I've heard that, that's actually the sixth sense, right? Is like sensing the body, and what's happening. Like you can feel yourself digesting food. These things are interoception as well, right? And I think the other thing that I wanted to name that, pull out that you said about trauma that I don't think everybody knows about, and I'm really passionate about advocating for this. We think of trauma as only, something violent, or, like an accident or some relational thing that's happened that's really big. And so the capital T trauma versus developmental trauma, I think, is what we're talking about, that belongs in this conversation as well. Anything essentially that interferes with your ability to experience the present moment as it is, any nervous system noise that hasn't been settled back down, that's also trauma, right? It's anything that's living in you. And so trauma-informed yoga, I'm curious, since I've never taken a trauma-informed yoga class, how would it be different than a regular yoga class? It sounds like there's some languaging and cues, and in a real studio, you'd be thinking about lighting and being sensitive. But are there any other differences that you haven't already explained? Just in terms of, like, I'm walking into a studio, or I'm walking to hit, start on my Zoom trauma-informed yoga class. What will I expect to be different?
Well, in the way that I offer, I always start with pranayama or some sort of breath practice, because it's something I know we'll dive down, if not today, at some other point, right? The polyvagal theory, where we can influence and send messages by using our breathing back into the heart space, into the brain, that lets us know we're safe and that we can do, right, some of this work to heal trauma. And so I always start with breath work. So if you're used to a class that doesn't do that, or starts standing or starts moving, I always spend the first few minutes, and there's so many different great breath practices. So sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, but really guiding each individual student, right, to take that pause, to notice and observe how the breath is feeling in the body before we even try to change anything, right? To just take that assessment of how are you showing up today, and really allow that without judgment, just in kind of a could be good, could be bad.
That moment alone is the trauma work of, like, allowing whatever is here,
right? And always acknowledging that it's hard, right? And it can be emotional when things come up. But that's how, the issues are in the tissues. So the way to release them is to actually, be with them in safe spaces, which is what I strive to, offer to folks. And then we usually work with shifting the breath. And there's a moment of noticing how, even after just a few moments of just breathing differently, right? Something so simply, how do you feel different? I always ask, again, I ask a lot, like, do you notice that? How do you feel that in your body? And I reconnect people back to the breath quite frequently. I suppose some yoga classes do that anyway, but I do it with that intention of, have you lost, where you are? Are you hurting because it's supposed to look some way, or you think it's supposed to look some way, or are you actually having an experience of yourself with yourself, which is, to me, what the practice should be. is
Mm-hmm.
moving through, more like almost a moving meditation.
I really love hearing, what I was sort of suspecting is that, the it's not necessarily what's different, but it's more of like what's emphasized in your class.
Yes.
And it's assuring safety and reminding of the mindfulness. So really promoting safety and awareness. And what I talk about with any healing modality is the importance of these two components of resourcing and self-study. And so self-study is, the awareness of like bringing your witness consciousness online. We could talk about the prefrontal cortex and how, getting your wisest mind online is the best thing you can do, particularly if you're dealing with some tender, trigger. But then the resourcing side is establishing safety, feeling compassion, making space. And so I just love hearing that these principles that I've been, just moving around in my book and in my mind and my heart are, and I'm not surprised that you've arrived there in a parallel, because that's been our pattern.
That's the way it goes.
Like, my girl. So yeah, I think that what I'm hearing is whether or not, like, it doesn't sound like you need to come to class expecting to heal your entire developmental, wounding history. Also, you don't need to come um, in in a triggered state to benefit from trauma-informed yoga, because it sounds like you're either settling the nervous system in order to reestablish safety, or establishing safety to tend to and process some older stuff. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think sometimes too what I offer is that it builds its resilience. So we talk about taking, the practice off the mat, which right now
Mm-hmm.
we're in a really great moment of our human history together to be practicing kind of breath to breath every single day. But we'll talk about, maybe in a harder shape or a standing posture or a twist or a balance, right? That you go back to your breath and you find that smooth breath and you find that peace of mind, because we're in a class and we know we're safe, right? We know we're only going to be here for 5 breaths or whatever it is. But so that off the mat, your nervous system starts to have that resilience and your breath starts to remember, right? And then that's how in the moment of stress, the fact that we've been practicing, that's why we call it practice. Then it hopefully in real life gives you a moment of pause where you go, wait, I've done this before. I know I can make it through a situation where in my head I was thinking it was too hard, because I did it. It might have been because it was a funny name shaped pose in a yoga class last week, but you start to build those new neural networks that let you pick a different path, that pause where you can respond differently to a stimulus. And yeah, so I'm often, cueing folks, are you in this shape and, we're letting go on each exhale, whatever it is. Is it actual physical tension? For many of us, that's what we're looking for, and that's what it is. Sometimes if you're willing to go deeper in your practice, if you're really using it as a lens, what you start to let go of in those moments are thought patterns, or beliefs that don't serve you anymore. And so just pointing out those moments of, yes, we're here on our mat doing this shape in a yoga practice, but also you're doing things that are deeply toning your nervous system to be able to, weather the next wave, because that's what's going to happen. We don't get to a state where everything just stays like this forever and ever. Amen. Right?
No, that's so cute when we wish for that.
Yeah, that's why we're all laughing at the irony of this moment. We've been training for this, even though we didn't know it.
Right. So yeah, what I'm hearing you describe is what I was just reading about I'm editing my book. I'm forever editing, but the window of tolerance, right? And so, when we are within the window of tolerance, which is what your yoga class is designed to promote, but you're also, challenging that upper end in a challenging pose towards going into hyper arousal, but you wouldn't send somebody there deliberately, but you're sending them to their safe edge within the window. And what we're working to do is broaden that, and anything that we're doing in healing from trauma where the nervous system is stuck in either sympathetic hyper arousal or more shut down dorsal vagal hypoarousal. And yeah, so it's just I'm just so glad to know that there are teachers like you doing this, because it's essential. And I think if more people understood the reason that they feel anxiety or depression, and some of it's genetic, but a lot of it is environmental. And I think if more people understood that they had what Mastin Kipp calls these dials on your nervous system that you could change, more people would be, at the front row in trauma-informed yoga. So I think, I'm really passionate, I think you are too, about normalizing and de-shaming and destigmatizing this concept that trauma is something that only happens to a few people. Like adverse childhood experiences, the ACE score, I think 70% of all people have at least a handful of these developmental, what I call dings, of things that set them back and might have impacted their ability to regulate the nervous system. So this is for everybody. This isn't just for a few people.
You talked about earlier how it matters if that moment of trauma or stress, how it's resolved or handled. And so when you think about the ACE study too, and you think about things happen to children, and sometimes a real tragic thing can happen and there's a lot of healing and it's handled well, and even though that's still part of their history, that trauma carries forward differently for that person than someone who didn't get that need met or didn't get that teaching about restoring equilibrium, and then something else happened down the road. And if you're already, one of my favorite analogies is, it's like if the doorbell and the alarm system were wired with the same sound. So you just learn to be on that hyper arousal all the time.
That's such a good analogy.
When you hear it, right, it doesn't, something's there. And so just the ability to start to tone that down, right? But you have to be aware of it. But anyway, that's an analogy. I can't remember where I heard it, one of my trainings, but it's really,
I just got chills. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for anybody listening, if you tend to be a little bit, jumpy with sound or with just stressors coming in, that might mean, you're right. Yeah. Like,
oh
hi.
My God. like I said, it's like the hair club for men, right? I'm a client.
So good. I love that. Right. And so, but that's an example of the doorbell and the alarm system being a little too closely connected. And we talked about before, the spaciousness of the noticing, of the witnessing, of the study, of the awareness. That's what begins to rewire. And so any yoga is going to promote this rewiring, but trauma-focused yoga is going to be more focused on the ability to rewire and control these dials, these nervous system dials.
I should say, probably so many teachers, many of the teachers I go to, right? Like, this is just, as we study yoga and all the limbs that yoga encompasses, it's kind of, it's just part of what yoga does. But I think in our Western culture, where I'm gonna have to speak, I want to be careful here, but not everyone has access to yoga in an affordable way, where they are always. And so that's a piece of it also, is trying to get it, like getting this technology, as I love to refer to it, because it's so fascinating how you can really shift your programming.
Oh my God, we have so much else to talk about. We could do this forever, but I think we'll start to wind down and pick up all these threads that we started to lay out in future conversations.
That sounds good.
I mean, when we spoke months ago, we knew that this is what's next.
And we haven't had a chance to talk in a while, so
I know. So we're like, Okay, so with respect to your class,
oh yes, I should.
Will be Saturday mornings at 9:30 Eastern on Embodiyou, and that's embodiyou.com. And you can access the schedule on the website. So find Melissa, find her wonderful bio and her shining face, like you're so lit up. I'm so excited to have you. And I can't wait to take your class. And I hope that even if you listening, don't think of yourself as, having some capital T trauma. Trust that if you're like,
or consider it prophylactically, right? You might have something happen to you, or does someone in your life have trauma, because you probably have vicarious trauma.
It's really more about nervous system resilience, which we can all
Absolutely.
benefit from. So yeah, cool. All right. Thank you, Melissa. I don't know if you have anything more to add, but I'm really happy to have had you join. Thank you so much.
No, I'm so excited. Thank you.
All right. Off we go. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.